Welcome to this explainer. Sometimes the press address is just a lot to take in. When a speaker covers literally everything from macroeconomics and global military strategy all the way to their own personal safety and, oddly enough, extreme sports statistics in a single sitting, it can be incredibly tough to digest. So our goal today is to untangle this sprawling stream of consciousness briefing. We're going to break the source material down into a structured map to really get a handle on the underlying worldview being presented here.
Okay, let's dive right in. We've categorized these disparate comments into 4 distinct pillars. First, ideology and the economy. Second, Iran and nuclear sites. Third, presidential assassination threats. And finally, rating the global allies.
Starting off with Section 1, Ideology and the Economy. He hits the ground running right where the address starts, framing the country's current state through a really sharp ideological lens. He takes a super firm stance, flat out calling communism a disaster that's been proven over thousands of years. And he extends that warning to terms like social democrats. He argues that, sure, it might sound nice, but actually, it's a very dangerous term. What's absolutely fascinating here is how he ties this directly to his own political support. He claims record support among Hispanic voters, and he attributes that to their first-hand experience living in communist or socialist countries. He essentially says they helped elect him in a landslide specifically because they know the dangers of these ideologies and want a stark alternative.
To counter that, he holds up the U.S. capitalist system as basically the ultimate shield. He points to record-high job numbers and unprecedented workers' salaries as undeniable proof that this system is superior. Now, he does briefly admit the system has some minor flaws, but he ultimately crowns it the best system. Why? Because in his view, this massive economic success is the crucial buffer protecting the country from the concept of us going communist, which he vividly describes as a fate where people die in squalor. In fact, he frames this internal ideological threat as being an even greater danger to the country than World Wars I and II, or even the attacks of September 11th and Pearl Harbor.
All right, let's transition to Section 2, Iran and nuclear sites.
This is where we get into the most pressing geopolitical issue of the briefing. A reporter pointedly asked the president about his wildly shifting views on Iranian leadership. Just a month prior, he had called them rational, nice, and smart. Fast forward to today, he's calling them scum, sick people, and lunatics. When pushed on this massive pivot, he explained it using this sort of framework of rationality levels. He noted that, based on their actions over the last couple of weeks, they've moved far past Level 1 and Level 2 rationality. Essentially, he's saying their recent behavior is so erratic that he's no longer sure he even wants to strike a deal with them at all.
Naturally, with all these tensions flaring in the Middle East, reporters wanted to know about the global fallout, especially the oil markets, which had actually seen a 7% spike that very day. But the speaker completely waves off any worries about a long-term oil crisis. He predicts a rapid drop, saying prices are, quote, dropping like a rock. His reasoning is actually pretty straightforward. He points to an existing global oil glut and mentions that boats have already pulled out of the Strait of Hormuz. He just projects immense confidence here, insisting that he's predicted everything correctly and that the whole situation will blow over very quickly without turning into some drawn-out conflict.
And this brings us to his highly specific, almost sci-fi claims about nuclear security. He transitions to talking about how to keep lunatics from getting nuclear weapons, and he outlines this extraordinary surveillance protocol. According to the president, the U.S. Space Force has cameras up in space that are so incredibly advanced they can read the security badge of a person walking up to a nuclear site. He uses a hypothetical guy named Mohammed approaching with a shovel. He claims that anyone trying to dig into these deeply underground sites will instantly get blown up. He uses this vivid, cinematic narrative to underscore his absolute certainty that Iran will never get a nuke on his watch, setting his approach apart from previous administrations.
Moving on to Section 3, presidential assassination threats.
The conversation then abruptly shrinks down from the macro global stage right down to his own personal safety. A reporter asked if he might change his travel plans, specifically maybe holding off on flying the new Air Force One because of assassination threats from Iran, and he just nonchalantly confirms it. He states, matter-of-factly, that he is #1 on the kill list for Iran. He even throws in a bit of dark humor, joking that while he'd much rather be #1 on TikTok, right now he's #1 on the list for killing.
So, the crucial takeaway here is how he quantifies this personal danger. To really drive home the inherent risks of being commander-in-chief, he cites a very precise mortality statistic for the presidency itself, 5.2%. He then contextualizes that 5.2% figure by making this completely surprising comparison between the presidency and extreme sports. He points out that race car drivers and bull riders, jobs that seem incredibly terrifying and dangerous to the rest of us, only face a fatality or danger rate of 0.1%. So, by contrast, that 5.2% rate makes being president vastly more dangerous. He playfully admonishes the reporter, joking that if someone had told him that statistic years ago, he might not have even run for office. But then he quickly pivots, saying he doesn't really care about the risk because he's too busy doing his job for a highly successful country.
Finally, we zoom back out for our fourth pillar, rating the global allies.
Answering that earlier question about his travel, he explains that he's definitely not avoiding the new Air Force One out of fear. In fact, he notes, the plane is heading out to 2 or 3 large military bases in Europe. The whole purpose? Just so American soldiers stationed overseas can get a look at the truly magnificent new aircraft. And that right there seamlessly transitions his focus back over to Europe and international relations.
When asked what he expects from European allies if a renewed conflict breaks out, he literally gives a real-time diplomatic scorecard of their recent responses. He bluntly calls out Spain, saying they've been very bad. Italy fares a bit better. He rates them as good, brushing off a recent lack of help as just a bad moment. But his sharpest critique, that's aimed squarely at the United Kingdom. He claims the UK offered to help but only wanted to do so after the war was over. He pointedly remarks that this attitude was, and I quote, not in the spirit of Winston Churchill. It's just a fascinating look at how direct and personal his diplomatic assessments are. On the flip side, he goes out of his way to praise relationships with nations outside of traditional Western Europe. He speaks highly of Turkey, crediting President Erdogan with the quick release of American pastor Brunson from a 35-year jail sentence, and proudly notes that the U.S. didn't have to pay billions of dollars to get him back, unlike previous administrations. He also praises Erdogan for staying out of recent conflicts at his direct request, even hinting that this loyalty might secure Turkey those highly coveted F-35 fighter jets. He offers similar praise for China and President Xi. Even though China gets 50% of their oil straight through the contested Hormuz Strait, he points out that they stayed out of the conflict and didn't send destroyers that could have escalated things.
So, what does this all mean? Well, the overarching conclusion of his entire address boils down to one word he explicitly highlights: unification. According to him, the United States has transitioned from an era where it was laughed at and led by people he calls a disaster to achieving an unprecedented state of global respect. He claims that allies now don't just love the United States, they actually love each other. He paints a picture of a world order that has finally fallen into line out of a renewed respect for American strength.
As we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a final thought. We've mapped out everything today, from economic ideologies and space-based surveillance all the way to extreme sports statistics and diplomatic scorecards, all delivered in one continuous breath. Consider for a moment how this unique, highly personal, and free-flowing communication style actually shapes the reality of international diplomacy today. Does this direct, unvarnished approach build the unification he claims, or does it fundamentally change what an alliance even means in the 21st century? It's a question definitely worth keeping in mind the next time you tune in to a live briefing. Thanks so much for learning with us today.